And now, it is once again my great honor to introduce our last speaker of the day, the Right and Honorable Stephen Harper, the 22nd Prime Minister of Canada. Served as Canada's Prime Minister from 2006 to 2015. Before, during, and after his time in office, the Right Honourable Stephen Harper has been steadfast in his support of Israel and has been vigorous in his efforts to fight anti-Semitism. Following Hamas's seizure of power in Gaza, he was the first Western leader to cut aid to prevent those monies from funding terror. Under his leadership, Canada was the first UN member nation to withdraw from the second UN Durban Conference because the event would, in his words, scapegoat the Jewish people. The Right Honourable Stephen Harper was the first Canadian Prime Minister to address the Knesset. He resides in Calgary, where he is the Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Harper and Associates, a global consulting firm. He holds a BA and MA degrees in economics from Calgary University. Please join me in welcoming the Right Honourable Stephen
Thank you for that very warm welcome. I almost tempted to quit while I'm ahead. That kind of welcome. First of all, I just want to say how delighted I am to be with all of you, but particularly our other distinguished guests. I can say to Senator Lieberman that I normally don't come to a speech until I'm to a talk like this, until I'm going to be on the podium, but I came early just to hear Joe Lieberman speak. And it was worth it. And of course, also joined by my great friend, former Prime Minister of Australia, Tony Abbott. I'm going to talk a lot today about what it was like fighting some lonely battles, but they were not lonely battles when Tony was there. We actually had, Israel had a great friend and ally in Tony, and conservatives around the world still have a great friend. Thank Rachel for that very kind introduction. I usually begin by saying that introductions like that are better than some I had in my political career. I think of one in particular. It was back one time when I spoke at a school, and an 11-year-old girl got up and she gave the following introduction. She said, "My mother says that my job is not to give a long and boring speech. It is to introduce the person who will." Now today, I will be a bit long, but I hope not too boring. I am, first of all, delighted to speak here. Like Joe, I actually had vaguely heard of the Center, but I didn't know much about it, but they told me my staff said, this group wants you to come and speak. And I said, who are they? They said, they're all lawyers. I said, what lawyers? They want me to speak to them. Well, these may be lawyers different than some of the lawyers you're used to talking to. Look, what you do here, I greatly admire. Obviously, as many of you know, I support Israel. I'm going to talk about that. I support primarily because you are a truly free and democratic society. And truly free and democratic society, we all know, come with rights. Rights to criticize the government, its policies, its officials, and of course other institutions. But it also comes with responsibilities. Those rights come with the exercise, responsible exercise of those rights. Those rights, for instance, right to free speech, is not supposed to be a right to slander or libel or defame or spread hatred. Nor in particular is the right to free speech supposed to be used as a front for the encouragement of actions of a violent or terrorist nature. But we see these things, and particularly we see these things way too often in attacks on Israel and its institutions, we see that they are of such a nature, often flagrantly false, deeply hateful, and of course are there to cause or encourage, in many cases, violence and terrorism. So you help provide the accountability that a truly free and democratic society demands in such instances. Now, I should also mention, as I begin this, that I tell people speaking to organizations like this since I left office is a relatively new experience. As was noted, I spent almost a decade as Prime Minister of Canada, something for which I shall be eternally grateful to the Canadian people. I know there are a few here today. Talk to my wife. But I tell people that in that capacity, I spent meetings, a lot of time in meetings around the world. In fact, meetings among some of the most powerful people on earth, where my voice in defense of Israel was very often a lonely one. But I like to say it was a clear and consistent one. Our government had a policy. That policy was strongly supported by all of my cabinet and caucus. That was that our government's recognition of Israel's right to exist was unconditional. Our support of Israel's right to self-defense was unequivocal, and our refusal to single out Israel for attack and sanction was unwavering. Our government took these positions, not just in front of groups like this. I got to tell you, in my experience, every politician is pro-Israeli when speaking to a Jewish group. I took these positions at the very time when Israel was being most vocally condemned and abandoned by its supposed friends around the world. So that's what I've been asked to talk about today. Why did you take these positions? Why were you such a strong supporter of Israel? The first thing I like to say when I'm asked that question is I think it's actually sad that I am asked that question so frequently. You know, a couple of generations ago, when I was a boy, when I was a young man, no one would have been asking a Canadian politician or a mainstream Western politician, for that matter, why he or she supports Israel. You would have assumed that they support Israel, that they support the right of Israel to defend itself. You would have been perplexed if that politician had not. But after more than a generation during which in many Western countries, the media, academia, and international organizations have made attacking Israel something of a cottage industry, the question sadly must now be asked and of course must be answered. Now, friends, to be frank, and maybe contrary to what some of you have heard, my support for Israel has never been religious or theological in nature. It is not based on any particular biblical interpretation. Tell people the truth, my support for Israel began with my upbringing. As far back in my family tree as I can gather, my ancestors have always been pro-Jewish. In particular, my father, Joe Harper, who passed away in 2003, he was a lifelong admirer of the Jewish people. And because of that, he was a vocal supporter of Israel and a very strong opponent of anti-Semitism, very strong and vocal opponent. And he was, I can tell you, he was so in an era where the opposite view was very common and very openly expressed in Canada. But my father believed that opposing anti-Semitism was not just the right thing to do. He believed it was an extremely prudent thing to do. And the reason for his views came in part from having grown up in the 1930s. He often reminded me of the widespread excuses that were made in Western countries for Adolf Hitler during the years of his rise. And he believed that the lesson of history was very clear. Those who, like Hitler, begin by targeting and threatening and hating the Jewish people inevitably target, threaten, and hate all of us. And this goes to the core of my support of Israel as Prime Minister. My view is that support for the state of Israel is of vital strategic importance. It is a matter of our own long-term interests, and I'm speaking here not of the long-term interests of Israel, that's transparent. I am speaking of the long-term interests of Canada, of the United States, and frankly of the wider Western world. Israel is a part of our wider Western democratic civilization. It is, in fact, our only real, unequivocal, and enduring ally in this, the most dangerous part of the world, the Middle East. It is the only country in this region which, like ours, has anchored itself in the ideals of freedom, democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. These are the things that over time have proven to be the only ground in which human rights, political stability, and economic prosperity, in other words, all the things we value in our way of life, is the only way that these things can take root and truly flourish among large elements of the population. The wider these values spread, the stronger they grow. Likewise, when they are threatened anywhere, they tend to be threatened everywhere. And what threatens them today, or what precisely most threatens them today, most threatens societies that embrace such values? It is, as it always is, those who scorn modernity, who despise the liberty of others, and who hold all differences of peoples, of cultures, and of religions in contempt. Those who, as my father said, often begin by hating Jews, but as history shows, end up hating all of us. And I would argue that today, on the top of that list, there's not one particular threat, but there is one that I think stands out at the top of that list. And that is the jihadist movement of radical Islam. It is a force which has threatened the state of Israel every single day of its 7-decade-plus existence. And it is a force which, as 9/11 showed, and far too many incidents around the world have similarly shown, today threatens all of us. So, friends, when I was Prime Minister, I looked around the world at this threat and other threats, and I concluded that as Canadians, we have a pretty clear choice. Either we stand up for our values and our interests right here on the front line with Israel, or the retreat of our values and our interests across the world will accelerate, and the greatest threats will come daily to our own shores. And that is why I believe that Canadians, why all free people should and must support the state of Israel. Reminded Canadians, what is the difference, really, between the threats that are faced by Israel and the threats faced by a country like Canada? And I can tell you, meet with our security people, they'll tell you, it is only one thing. The threats are much closer to Israel than they are to us. One of those threats, much closer to Israel, but common to all of us, is the threat that is posed by the theocratic dictatorship of Iran, and in particular by its pursuit of nuclear weapons and its nuclear program. I chair, some of you may know, I chair an organization called the Friends of Israel Initiative. It is an international group of former non-Jewish high office holders who are dedicated to defending and promoting the state of Israel on the world stage. Earlier, I guess it was a while back now, the founder of that organization, former Prime Minister of Spain, Aznar, and myself published a piece in the Wall Street Journal in which we argued that for all of our sakes, all nations need to stand with Israel and against the Iranian regime, and in particular against the JCPOA. In our view, fundamentalist mullahs potentially possessing nuclear weapons is simply too dangerous a prospect for the world to tolerate in any form. And that nuclear deal, the so-called Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, in our view, will not prevent that from happening. First, it is hampered by limited monitoring provisions, as these deals almost always are. Second, it has continued to allow Iran to develop nuclear weapons delivery systems unimpeded. And third, even its weak provisions have a 10-year sunset clause. What Prime Minister Aznar and I have essentially, and others have essentially argued, that the deal has really been a roadmap for Iran to obtain nuclear weapons capability in less than a decade, which of course we should never accept. So look, friends, I say this, regardless, and I know controversial everywhere, regardless of what views you may have of Donald Trump, he deserves full mark for his correct and courageous decision to vote. One of the rare occasions when I would actually wanted to have been back in office. There was a couple of them back in office, so I could have stood with President Trump and been part of that decision. On the other hand, I have to say there are many occasions where I'm glad I don't have to stand. Anyway, the fact of the matter is that the Islamic Republic of Iran, its imperialist ambitions, and its hateful ideology is the greatest threat to peace in the Middle East, and indeed I believe it is the greatest threat to peace in the world today. And to those who don't understand these things, it is important for us to explain to them that the country that is the most peaceful and the least threatening in this part of the world is in fact the state of Israel. There is another threat to Israel that I want to talk about. It is one that is even closer to us as Western nations, because quite frankly, it emanates from Western nations. And that is, I know it's a deep concern to you, and that is the so-called BDS movement. In my view, friends, the BDS movement is not merely wrong, it is much more sinister. As you know, we all live in an era, many great things about this era, but one of the marks of this era is we live in an era of increasing moral relativism in Western societies. And one of the dangers of moral relativism is that in that kind of environment, in that kind of ground, the seeds of much more sinister notions can easily be planted. BDS purports to criticize certain policies of the government of Israel. You do not have to read very much at all to understand that what BDS is attacking Israel's very legitimacy and right to exist as a state, and more profoundly, it is attacking that right precisely because Israel is a Jewish state. BDS is about nothing more. I refuse to engage in intellectual debate with these people, and I did as Prime Minister. BDS is about nothing more than taking the old hatred of anti-Semitism and trying to translate it into sophisticated and intellectual language for use in polite society. People who claim or who say they would never hate and blame the Jews for their own failings or for the problems of the world, instead declare their hatred of Israel and blame the only Jewish state for all the problems of the world. As once Jewish businesses were boycotted, today they call for a boycott of Israel. I tell people my son Benjamin, in his first year of university, came back from his campus, a Canadian campus, with a BDS sign that he had seen, brought it home for me to see. A Star of David with a slash through it. In other words, it could have come from Berlin in 1938. The truth of the matter is that the intellectualized arguments that are used on campuses only thinly mask some other realities, and those realities are the hatred that is directed towards Jewish students, towards Israeli academics, and toward the supporters of Israel generally. BDS is a movement of hatred. We must call it as such, we must denounce it as such, and we must do so on every opportunity in as loud a voice as we possibly can. And I'd just like to say that I'm very proud of the fact, since I left, this actually happened since I left Parliament, my Conservative Party led a resolution in the House of Commons to condemn BDS, and it ultimately passed. And as I've said, as you all understand, Israel is not remotely the source of the problems in the world today, and it frankly is not even remotely the source of problems in this region. Let us never forget, let us constantly remind people why peace, freedom, and democracy have still not come to most of the Middle East. It is not because of anything Israel has done or has not done. It is not because of Israel's failures or imperfections. It is not because of Israel's existence or its policies. The instability and brutality in much of this region, the causes of its violence, its oppression, its relentless poverty, these things all fall well beyond Israel's borders. In fact, to be frank, I would say that if you look at the Middle East today, maybe it's not quite as bad as it was a couple of years ago, but it's still bad. What you see happening in the Middle East today, outside of Israel, is really a story of ongoing ethnic cleansing, or to be more specific, sectarian cleansing. It began several decades ago with the expulsion and flight of Jewish minorities from most of the regional states. In more recent years, the same things began happening to Christian minorities, including, by the way, in the Palestinian territories. And now, in some countries, we are seeing the same thing happen even to Muslim minority groups as well. The truth has always been that in too many countries, it is easier to scapegoat Israel than to try and copy your success. It is easier to foster resentment and hatred of Israel's democracy than it is for leaders to provide the same rights and freedoms to their own people. No, the fundamental reason why there is no peace in the Middle East today, and specifically, the fundamental reason why there has been no final settlement of the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians, and especially the fundamental reason there is still no sovereign state for the Palestinians, is quite simply because there are too many in the Middle East, including too many Palestinians, who for generation after generation have refused to accept the right of a Jewish state to exist. Now we have to, I know you know this, we have to remind people, because they're constantly given other messages. I tell people, I said as Prime Minister repeatedly that I favored a two-state solution. Most Jewish people I know around the world favor some form of a two-state solution. The majority of Israelis I've met feel the same way. But the reality is that a large majority of Palestinians simply do not. Let us take for a moment, let us remind our friends, neighbors, co-workers, people from other countries, to remind ourselves of what the actual position of the Palestinian leadership is on the two-state solution. We will be told the Palestinian leadership says it accepts a two-state solution. But let's cut down a little bit from that. It accepts a two-state solution, but it explicitly refuses to recognize the right of Israel to exist as a Jewish state. More than that, it demands a right of return of countless millions of Arabs to Israel. To be clear, not a return to a Palestinian state in the Gaza Strip or West Bank, but a return to the undisputed territory of Israel itself. This, by the way, as it also demands the removal of all Jews from any Palestinian state. So in other words, the Palestinian two-state solution is this. It's one Arab state, Palestine, to be ethnically cleansed of Jews, and the other Arab state, Israel, where Jews can be allowed to live as a minority. In other words, the Palestinian two-state solution is two Arab states. Now look, my friend, Prime Minister, your Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, is never going to agree to that. But friends, no Israeli leader is ever going to agree to that. And no countries in the world, none of our Western countries, none of our Western friends and allies should ever be pressuring Israel to ever agree to something like that. The truth is, there's kind of a narrative out there. It's part of our societies, and I suppose it exists for good reason. Part of the narrative for our societies is if someone is down and out, down on their luck, downtrodden, in a bad situation, they're not really to blame. We should do what we should do to help them. But the reality of the situation here, friends, is this. It's that since 1947, the Palestinians have frequently had a choice. They have had a choice of accepting part of the old British Mandate of Palestine as their state. But on each occasion, when push has come to shove, their position has been if they can't have it all, they choose to have nothing instead. It is sad. It is terribly sad. But that is the hole they put themselves in. And frankly, frankly now, for many years, I hear people tell me Israel should go to have negotiations. Palestinians refuse to come to the bargaining table. They have for years now. And frankly, many in the international community, including many of the former leaders I dealt with, by offering them diplomatic victory after victory for refusing to negotiate, have only rewarded such self-defeating behavior. Now, friends, another question I've been asked was this: what was it like to be alone or close to alone in defending Israel in international meetings? First of all, to tell you, not that surprising. Just before I go farther, I should draw attention. I don't see her, but I know she's here. The Canadian ambassador to Israel, Deborah Lyons, is here today. Anyway, I don't know where she would give her a big hand. There you are, Deborah. I gotta say this because I'm going to launch into a cutting attack on the diplomatic community, but Deborah's one of the good guys, so I'm not talking about Deborah. Why do I say it's not surprising that I found myself in that position? Well, first, look at the world of diplomacy. Now look, I wish I could tell you that diplomacy is all about pursuing lofty ideals around the globe. It's certainly not, I think you know that. But I wish I could tell you that diplomacy was just about pursuing national interests. The truth of the matter, most of the time, it's not even that good. The truth is that diplomatic activity around the world is often about nothing more than doing what is easiest. And with 24 Arab states and 5 Muslim states and 1 solitary Jewish state, the easiest path at so many meetings is simply to go along, to get along with every anti-Israeli resolution. This is what, of course, I face on a regular basis. By the way, I faced it not just dealing with other countries. In fact, I will tell you that the biggest battles I had on this were from my own Foreign Affairs Department in Ottawa. I could give you many examples, but let me give you one that you will not forget. In 2011, we were planning a public media event around the so-called Arab Spring and the consular assistance we were about to offer our nationals who were stranded in various countries that were suddenly having upheaval and riots and violence. Our foreign affairs officials they wanted me to come over to the Foreign Affairs Department. They had a nice press room and they had prepared a nice display for me to get up and make a few comments. And one of the things behind me on the backdrop was a map of the Middle East. There was one problem. Israel was left off the map entirely, as if it did not exist, which I can tell you, unfortunately, is a problem in many of those circles. I kept that map in my office, by the way, for the rest of my time in government, just to remind ourselves what we were up against. But look, I can also tell you this, on the more optimistic note, and first of all, there are a lot more optimistic notes. I mean, one of the realities today is that in spite of we deal with it as Friends of Israel, in spite of the ongoing bias isn't even the word, the ongoing hatred of Israel at kind of the United Nations institution level, the reality is that Israel's bilateral relations around the world are moving in a positive direction like never before. I'd say 75 to 80% of the world is moving in a very pro-Israeli direction, not necessarily there yet, but moving in that direction. The big exception is Western Europe. Western Europe is moving in the opposite direction. But what I want to tell you is this, not just that that's a good thing, I wanted to tell you that in spite of my supposed isolation in international events, I was not actually as isolated as it would sometimes seem. I found that in private meetings with, frankly, most world leaders, I often wasn't alone in the positions I took on these various issues of conflict in the Middle East. In fact, many of the leaders actually privately agreed with the positions that I took. But once the cameras rolled, it was a different matter. The truth is that Western politicians today in many countries face a torrent of unrelenting media venom against Israel. But just remember this, speak truth with conviction, and the vast majority of the population will get it. I can tell you I faced this in Canada. If you went to Canada and saw the press coverage, most of the press coverage, of my positions on these issues when I was in office, you would have thought that virtually no one in the country agreed with me. The truth is, my views were a majority position in the population, and that majority grew stronger. It went up during my time of office. So much so that my Liberal successors have found they can reverse those policies only very carefully and only very, very slowly. So I mentioned that, and let me mention that in this regard, that my successor as leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, the Honourable Andrew Scheer, who I believe stands a very good chance of being Prime Minister in this fall's election. He is not only going to uphold the positions that my government took, but he has already committed to moving the Canadian Embassy in Israel to where it belongs. So, friends, I guess the message I have here is, when I say to you, I know and I appreciate that you have been so supportive of the positions that I took as Prime Minister of Canada. You should really expect nothing less from the leaders of our country today and in the future. And friends, I think the lesson of all this, and I say this around the world, although I know there is no need to say it here at Shradadi, the lesson really is never be afraid to take the right position of Israel, and never be anything but proud of Israel. This country, I have been to an awful lot of places, this country has been built from virtually nothing in just 3 generations, and built from virtually nothing by the remnants of populations who in some cases have been almost annihilated. Built from nothing to become one of the most successful countries on earth. I am involved. I'm here this week mostly on business. Harper and Associates, one of our partners, is a venture capital technology fund based in Canada, the Oz fund, which invests in technology and security, cybersecurity, information security, physical security. And we are global in scope, and we find inevitably that the single best products and innovations are being made here in the state of Israel. But it is not just there. This country is literally an oasis. It is literally an oasis of wealth, of freedom, of culture, of security in the most troubled part of the world. You here in Israel daily face extraordinary dangers and security threats, and you do so while doing your utmost to uphold standards of justice and fair treatment for all, even for your enemies. In short, when you put all that together, I believe that Israel really is, modern Israel, is one of the most remarkable countries that has ever been created. And let me assure you that whatever you may see from the media or the intellectuals or BDS or that whole crowd, there are millions of people in my country, not of Jewish faith or background, just as there are hundreds of millions around the world who join me in the admiration that I just expressed of what you in Israel have accomplished in a mere 7 decades. I want to thank you once again for the invitation to be here. I want to thank you for the great work that you do here at Strategy.
Ladies and gentlemen, please stay in your seats. Please stay in your seats. For security reasons, you must stay in your seats.